"You're my slave forever," said the lone rancher after her in-laws ripped off all her clothes. These words were a brand, meant to burn away any hope that remained. The first jeer from the crowd was a sharp stone, thrown to see if she would flinch. Lyra stood on the raised platform in the center of the dusty outpost plaza, the twin suns beating down until the air wavered like heated glass. They had torn her formal mourning clothes, the fine dark fabric hanging in ribbons, exposing her to the hungry eyes of the settlement. Her face was smeared with engine grease, a mark of shame in a place where clean machinery was life. A man, her late husband's brother, held her arms behind her, his grip casual but firm, his knuckles digging into her skin. He smelled of sour synthale and satisfaction. The matriarch, a woman whose face was a collection of hard angles and harder certainties, circled her, speaking to the onlookers. Useless. Cursed. A drain on resources. Each word was a verdict, delivered with the cold finality of a magistrate. The crowd murmured its agreement, a low, ugly sound that fed on her humiliation. This was justice on the frontier, swift and without appeal. She was property, inherited and found wanting. She was to be broken here, remade into something that would serve without question. That was when a shadow fell over her, a cool interruption in the relentless glare. Cale stopped at the edge of the platform, his heavy work boot silent in the dust. He had been on his way to the trade depot, his mind on the price of hydrocoolant and the worn seals on his cargo hauler, when the noise from the plaza had pulled him in. It was a familiar sound, the baying of a pack that had cornered something. He pushed through the crowd, his face unreadable, and the murmurs died in his wake. He wasn't large, but he moved with the dense stillness of a man who wasted nothing, not energy, not words, not emotion. The matriarch turned, her eyes narrowing at the interruption. "This is clan business," she spat. Cale's gaze went past her, to Lyra. To the trembling in her shoulders she was trying so hard to hide. "She's coming with me," he said. The voice was low, rough around the edges like unpolished iron, but it cut through the heat and the hate with absolute clarity. It promised nothing but its own truth. The brother holding Lyra laughed, a short, barking sound. "Get lost, scavenger." "This ain't your concern." Cale took one step onto the platform. He looked at Lyra, and for the first time, spoke directly to her. Get up. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes, filled with the flat, dead light of someone who expected only more pain, met his. The brother shifted, his free hand dropping to the heavy pistol at his hip. Cale closed the distance. His hand came to rest on the man's shoulder, not a strike, but a weight. The weight of someone who knew precisely how much pressure to apply before something gave. The man's confidence faltered. "I said," Cale repeated, his voice unchanged. "She's coming with me," or the matriarch scoffed. "You can't just take her. She is ours by bond and by law." "She is nothing." Cale let the silence stretch until it became a weapon. "Not anymore." He unfastened the clasps of his long, dust-colored duster, the fabric worn soft from years of travel between worlds. He draped it over Lyra's shoulders, covering her. It was a simple gesture, but in the suffocating theater of the plaza, it was a rebellion. She stood, her legs shaking, her borrowed strength drawn from the quiet command in his eyes. He kept his hand near her back, not touching but ready, as they stepped down from the platform. The crowd parted for them, their whispers like the dry rustle of snakes in the scrub grass. They walked into the blinding light of the twin suns, the heat of physical blow. The whispers followed them, accusations and assumptions, but they seemed to slide off Cale's back like dust in a hard wind. They reached his cargo hauler, an old, scarred vessel parked at the edge of the landing field. The ramp was high, the climb seeming impossible. Cale didn't ask. He simply put one arm under her knees and the other around her back, lifting her as if she weighed no more than a spare power cell. He set her down inside the ship's airlock, her spine rigid against the cold metal wall. He sealed the outer door, and the jeers of the crowd were cut off, replaced by the low hum of the ship's life support. They moved out at a slow, deliberate pace, the hauler's engines barely disturbing the dust as they lifted away from the settlement and the life she had known. Cale didn't look back, but he could feel the eyes of the clan on his ship until they were just another glint in the vast, unforgiving sky. The outpost shrank behind them, a tiny smudge of civilization in a sea of rust-colored desert. Lyra sat strapped into the co-pilot's chair, the heavy duster clutched around her, her knuckles white. A stray lock of hair, dark with grease, fell across her cheek. The ship's cabin was Spartan, smelling of ozone and recycled air. Cale piloted with an economy of motion, his gaze scanning the horizon, a flat, endless line where the bruised purple sky met the ochre dust. He could feel the tension radiating from her, a brittle energy that filled the small space between them. He said nothing. Words were a burden, and she was already carrying too much. The second sun began its slow dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and red. The shadows of the mesas stretched into long, skeletal fingers across the plains. Somewhere in the deep quiet of the cabin, broken only by the hum of the ship, her breathing began to even out. But her posture remained ramrod straight, as if expecting a blow. As they cleared a high ridge, the ship's proximity sensors gave a soft chime. Cale's eyes flickered to the display. 3 small contacts, low on the horizon behind them, matching their course. Too far to identify, but their presence was a cold knot in his gut. He felt her shift, her head turning slightly as if she, too, could sense the pursuit. The air grew tight again. Neither of them spoke, but in the silence of the cockpit, they both understood this was far from over. He adjusted their course, heading deeper into the uncharted Badlands, a place where the canyons twisted like knotted rope and the sky seemed to weigh down on the land. Lyra did not look back at the sensor screen. She didn't have to. She could feel the knowledge of them, a persistent weight, like a stone she could not set down. The journey was long, a slow crawl over a landscape that offered no comfort. Near the fall of full dark, they descended into a deep, hidden canyon, its walls carved by ancient winds. A flat ledge came into view, just wide enough for the hauler. Tucked under a massive rock overhang was a small, prefabricated shelter, its metal walls scoured by sand to a dull silver. A single solar array stood nearby, folded for the night. Cale brought the hauler in for a smooth landing, the engines powering down with a final sigh. "We'll stay here," it was the first thing he'd said since leaving the outpost. She gave a small, jerky nod, her eyes fixed on the shelter. He unstrapped himself and came around to her chair. She flinched as he reached for the buckle, then let him release her. He led her down the ramp, the canyon air cold and sharp against her skin. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a metal crate near the shelter's door. "I'll get water," she did as she was told, perching on the edge of the crate, the duster still wrapped tightly around her. The silence here was profound, a living thing that pressed in from the canyon walls. The only sound was the faint whisper of wind through the rock formations above. He returned with a basin and a clean cloth, setting them beside her. He poured water from a purifier, the clear liquid a startling contrast to the grime on her skin. "For your face," her hands shook as she took the cloth. She dipped it in the cool water, the simple act feeling momentous. The grease came away in black swirls, clouding the basin. She worked methodically, the scrape of the cloth against her skin the only sound between them. When she finished, she looked at him, an unspoken question in her eyes. He gave a single, slow shake of his head. "I'll see to the ship," he said, and left her there. From inside the shelter, she heard the low thrum of a generator kicking in, followed by the soft glow of lights. The interior was as sparse as the ship's cabin, a single bunk, a small workbench covered in tools, a compact galley unit. She moved through the space carefully, as if afraid she might break something by touching it. On the bunk lay a neatly folded set of simple, grey coveralls. When he came inside, the shelter was filled with a steady, quiet warmth. He carried 2 heated ration packs. He placed one on the small table in front of her and sat opposite with his own. Each she ate slowly, mechanically, the synthesized protein tasteless but necessary. He didn't speak, his attention on the faint play of the shelter's external lights on the canyon wall opposite. When she set her fork down, having eaten only half, he simply nodded and took her plate. He pointed to the bunk. "You take that. I'll take the cockpit. She hesitated in the doorway between the main room and the small sleeping alcove. The door doesn't lock, it stays open, he said, not looking up from his work cleaning a power conduit on the bench. In case you need something. She left the door ajar, the sliver of light from the main room a thin line of defense against the overwhelming dark of the canyon. Sleep did not come easily. The wind moaned outside, a lonely sound that echoed the hollowness inside her. Once, she thought she heard the distant whine of an engine, but when she peered through the crack in the door, Cale was still at the bench, his head bent over his work, his movements calm and deliberate. Just before dawn, she rose and pulled on the grey coveralls. They were too big, but they were clean. She stepped outside into the frigid air. Cale was already there, checking the ship's landing struts, his breath pluming in the pale light. He saw her but only gave a slight nod. The canyon was different from the open desert she'd left. Still vast, still isolating, but the high walls felt protective, a sanctuary carved from the stone. When he finished his checks, he handed her a heated tin cup. Nutrient paste, he said. It was bland and thick, but it was warm. Throughout the day, she began to find small things to do. She washed the basin and her cup, setting them out to dry. She found a magnetic broom and swept the metal floor of the shelter, the rhythmic motion a comfort. Cale never commented, but she felt his awareness of her, a quiet observation that held no judgment. Late that afternoon, she watched from the shelter's doorway as he calibrated the ship's external sensors, his silhouette framed against the deep blue of the canyon sky. He moved with a focused grace, a man entirely at home in this desolate landscape. When he came back inside, he left his duster on a hook by the door. Without it, she could see the old scars on his arms, the hard lines of a life lived on the sharp edges of the galaxy. That evening, after their silent meal, he placed a small tube on the table between them. For the cuts, he said, glancing at the raw marks the brother's grip had left on her arms. It was a simple antibacterial salve. She opened it, and the clean, medicinal scent rose between them. That night, she left the alcove door open a little wider. The wind had died down, and the silence of the canyon was absolute. As she lay on the bunk, she realized how far they were from the settlement, from the matriarch's venomous words. But distance did not guarantee safety. In the quiet space before sleep, she wondered if the contacts on the sensor screen had found a way to follow them into these hidden canyons. The day settled into a quiet rhythm, marked by the cycles of the twin suns. Lyra moved with a growing sense of purpose within the small shelter, her presence no longer that of a frightened ghost. She spoke little, but there was a change in the way she held herself, her shoulders less hunched, her gaze now willing to meet his. It happened on the third evening, as the ship's generator hummed its low, steady song. She was sitting at the table, restitching a tear in the coveralls, when she spoke without looking up. "You want to know why they did it?" Her voice was quiet, but it held the weight of a question that had to be asked. Cale stopped his work at the bench, came to the table, and sat opposite her. He said nothing, simply waited. "My bondmate, Ren, he died 6 months ago," she began, her needle moving with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. A pressure rupture in the lower mines. It was quick. She paused, swallowing hard. "I stayed with his clan. It's the law on these frontier worlds. I had nowhere else to go." His mother, she looked at me as if I'd stolen the air her son used to breathe. She told him of the endless work, the dwindling rations, the whispers that she was a curse on their house. The mine's output dropped. A vital water reclaimer failed. It was my fault. Always my fault. Her eyes finally flickered up to his. The first time they shamed me, it was private. Just words. This time. The thread in her hands pulled tight. This time they wanted to break me for everyone to see. To make me an example. Cale sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the table. The silence that followed was not empty. "And they nearly did," he said. It was not an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. A flicker of defiance sparked in her eyes. "They don't like to be dishonored in front of the other clans. You taking me, they'll see it as a challenge to their authority." He didn't disagree. He'd seen that kind of pride before. It was a corrosive thing, and it never let go easily. The next day, a long-range transmission pinged the ship's comms. It was a coded message from the trader Cale knew at the outpost. He decrypted it in silence. The clan had filed a formal grievance with the sector authority, claiming Lyra had stolen valuable mining data and that Cale was a hired kidnapper. They declared her forfeit, a fugitive from clan law. They were coming to collect their property. Cale erased the message before Lyra could see it, but that night, he spent hours reinforcing the shelter's blast door and setting up a perimeter defense system, a web of sonic emitters that would trigger an alarm if anything crossed the canyon floor. Lyra watched him. She saw the new tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the canyon rim. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He met her gaze directly this time. "Some folks don't like being told no," she said nothing more, but the next day, her movements were quicker, more efficient. She helped him run diagnostics on the defense grid, her small hands fitting into places his couldn't reach. It was as if she could build a wall against her fear with simple, productive work. That evening, the air grew heavy and still, the silence in the canyon deeper than usual. As the last light faded from the sky, Cale stepped outside the shelter, a pulse rifle in his hands. From the doorway, Lyra watched him pause, his head tilted, listening to something she couldn't hear. He stood like that for a full minute before coming back inside, his face grim. She didn't ask what he'd heard. But later, lying on the bunk, she stared at the sliver of light from the open door, listening for a sound beyond the frantic thud of her own heart. The attack came with the false dawn. A low whine of engines echoed down the canyon, growing steadily louder. Lyra was already awake, dressed. Cale was at the ship's sensor panel, his face illuminated by the green glow of the display. 2 land speeders, 1 heavy hauler. "They're coming in slow." Lyra came to stand beside him, her hands clenched at her sides. She recognized the configuration. The 2 speeders would carry her husband's brothers, armed and aggressive. The hauler would be for the matriarch, and for carrying her back. The sonic perimeter alarm blared, a piercing shriek that was quickly silenced. They were here. Cale grabbed the rifle. "Stay inside." "Bar the door." "No," she said, the word surprising them both. "I'm not hiding." He looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, but also a core of hard, newly forged steel. He nodded once, then moved to the mouth of the overhang, using the rocks for cover. The speeders skidded to a halt 50 meters from the shelter, kicking up clouds of red dust. The brothers emerged, weapons raised. From the hauler, the matriarch descended, her face a mask of cold fury. "You have stolen our property, scavenger," she screamed, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "She is not property," Cale called back, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to her shrieking rage. The broader of the 2 brothers laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can hide from clan law out here? There's nowhere you can run." "I'm not running," Lyra said. She stepped out from behind Cale, standing in the open. The duster was gone, and she wore the simple grey coveralls, her face clean, her posture straight. Her voice did not shake. "I am not your property. I am not a curse. I am free." The matriarch's eyes blazed with hatred. "You are nothing without us. You will be taught your place." The narrow-faced brother raised his rifle. "We're taking her back." One way or another. At that moment, a new sound filled the canyon. A deep, powerful thrum from above. Everyone looked up. A sleek, black patrol cutter was descending, its running lights flashing. It settled on the canyon floor between the 2 groups, its side hatch opening to reveal a uniformed sector marshal, flanked by 2 armed officers. The marshal, a woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression, surveyed the scene. "We picked up a distress signal tied to a clan grievance filing. Looks like we got here just in time." Her eyes took in Cale's defensive posture, the brothers' aggressive stances, and Lyra standing tall and defiant. "Clan matter, Marshal," the matriarch said, her tone suddenly syrupy. "A simple retrieval of a bonded servant." The marshal shook her head. Bonded servitude was outlawed sector-wide 10 years ago. "She's a free citizen." "Your grievance is invalid." She turned to the brothers. and pointing weapons at a citizen is a serious offense. I suggest you power down and leave." Now for a long, tense moment, nobody moved. The brothers looked at their mother, whose face had contorted with impotent rage. She spat on the red dust. "This isn't over," she hissed at Lyra. "Yes," Lyra said, her voice clear and ringing in the quiet canyon. "It is." The marshal and her officers stayed until the clan's vehicles had retreated down the canyon and vanished from sight. The marshal gave Cale a long, appraising look. "You might want to find a less contested part of the sector to lay low for a while." Cale just nodded. When the patrol cutter was gone, a profound silence descended. Cale turned to Lyra, who was still standing in the open, watching the empty canyon. "You're safe now," he said. She finally looked at him, and for the first time, a small, weary smile touched her lips. She wanted to believe him. And in the silence, where the echoes of engines had been, she started to. The dust settled in the canyon, and with it, a deep and abiding quiet. The patrol cutter's presence had been a final, undeniable statement. The clan's authority was broken here. For the first time since she'd stood on that platform, Lyra felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. The days that followed were different. She rose with the first light, not out of duty, but out of a growing desire to shape her own hours. She started a small hydroponic garden inside the shelter, tending to the new seedlings with a gentle focus that was a balm to her spirit. Cale watched her, saying little, but a new ease had settled between them. The long silences were now comfortable, filled with the quiet hum of the shelter's systems and the shared rhythm of their work. He repaired the ship, she maintained the shelter's life support, their tasks overlapping in a partnership that needed no words. One evening, she brought him a cup of hot nutrient broth as he sat on the crate outside, watching the stars emerge in the ink-black sky. He took it with a quiet thanks, the steam rising between them. "Going to need a bigger garden soon," he said, his eyes on the sky. She followed his gaze, feeling the solid rock of the canyon floor beneath her feet. "I suppose we will." Over time, their conversations grew, small threads of personal history woven into the fabric of their shared present. She told him about the world she'd grown up on, a green world so different from this desert. He told her of the star systems he'd seen, the strange cargoes he'd hauled. One night, as they watched a meteor shower streak across the sky, Cale went into the ship. He returned with a small, flat object. He sat beside her, handing it to her. It was a multi-tool, finely crafted and perfectly balanced, its casing engraved with the star chart of an unknown constellation. "For when you're ready to build something of your own," he said. The gift was not an ornament. It was a promise of capability, a quiet, unshakable belief in her future. A new season came to the desert, bringing with it a change in the winds. Lyra moved with an easy confidence, her hand steady, her mind clear. The garden flourished under her care. The tension had left her shoulders completely, though Cale sometimes saw her pause and look down the canyon, a fleeting shadow in her eyes. The marshal sent a message one day. The clan had sold their mining rights and moved to another sector. They were gone. Lyra read the message, and the long, slow breath she released seemed to carry the last of her past away with it. That night, she prepared a meal from their garden, the fresh greens a vibrant, crisp luxury. They ate, and she found herself smiling at him across the small table. As the weeks turned to months, their life took on a rhythm that was less about survival and more about living. They explored the nearby canyons, Cale teaching her to read the rock, to find water, to navigate by the stars. There was laughter now, sometimes, a sound that seemed startling and beautiful in the deep silence of their world. On one of these evenings, as they sat watching the twin moons rise, Cale spoke without turning his head. "Don't reckon you're planning on leaving?" It was not a question. She let the words hang in the cool night air. "I don't reckon I am," she said. He finally looked at her then, and the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. The days grew longer. Lyra learned to pilot the hauler, her touch on the controls surprisingly deft. Cale watched her one afternoon as she brought the ship in for a perfect landing, the multi-tool clipped to her belt, catching the light. Something settled in him then, a restlessness he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying for years. On a day when the air was crisp and clear, he asked her to walk with him to the high rim of the canyon. The suns were setting, bathing the endless desert in gold and purple light. He stopped at the edge, the whole world spread out below them. "I figure you've had enough taken from you," he said, his voice low and rough. "I'd like to give you something that can't be taken away." She looked at him, the wind stirring her hair. "And what's that?" "My name." For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the wind. Then she smiled, a small, sure smile that reached her eyes. Yes, they made their vows 2 days later, standing on the canyon rim alone. There was no officiant, no crowd, only the ancient rocks and the vast sky as their witnesses. She wore her simple grey coveralls, the multi-tool at her hip. He stood beside her, his duster back on, looking at her as if she were the first star he had ever seen. Afterward, they returned to the shelter, the doorway bathed in the soft light of the rising moons. She leaned against him, the smell of ozone and desert dust mingling between them. The land stretched before them, no longer a place of hiding, but a home, carrying the quiet promise of a future they would build together. Now, click on the story on your screen that's even deeper than this one. You'll feel it long after the fire dies down. Go on. I'll be waiting. Sometimes a tale like this sits with you longer than you expect. A woman, shamed and stripped of everything, stood in the dust with nothing left but the will to endure. A man, as quiet and unyielding as the landscape itself, stepped between her and the cruelty that meant to break her. Together, they didn't just survive. They built a world. And now I want to hear from you. What stayed with you most? The moment he draped his duster over her shoulders? The multi-tool, a promise not of beauty, but of capability? Or the vow spoken with no one watching but the stars? If you've ever known what it is to stand for someone, or to be given back a piece of yourself you thought was lost forever, tell me in the comments. Where in this universe are you hearing this story from tonight? Your words matter here because each story is more than mine. It's ours. Now, there's another tale waiting for you. Click on the story showing on your screen. It runs even deeper, and I think it'll move you in ways you don't see coming. I'll be here by the fire, ready to tell the next one.